an airline mystery that experts have not been able to solve even after many years. There is still no information about where the plane, carrying 227 passengers, is today. In fact, I'm talking about one of the world's most intriguing aviation mysteries, Malaysia Airlines Flight NMH370, which suddenly disappeared during its journey, leaving everyone who heard about it speechless. For years, dedicated investigators have searched the seas and examined every clue to uncover what really happened. But now, a document has been leaked that might finally provide the answers we've been seeking. Today, let's embark on a fascinating journey together as we explore key findings and thought-provoking theories that could help us unravel the mystery behind the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370. This video is made in full detail. You must watch it till the end. If you have not subscribed to the channel before, then subscribe to this channel. On March 8th, 2014, MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia's lively capital city right at midnight. It was headed to Beijing, the bustling capital of China, with over 200 passengers on board, all set to either return to their familiar home or kick off an exciting adventure in a new place. The flight had 227 passengers from 14 different countries, along with 12 Malaysian crew members, a pretty diverse bunch traveling across oceans and lands. Little did they know what was about to unfold. It was supposed to be just another routine flight, with Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid at the controls of the Boeing 777-200ER, a plane known for its safety and cutting-edge tech, and a favorite for long-haul journeys. Everything seemed pretty chill as MH370 took off into the night sky, with passengers getting comfy. But then, out of nowhere, it disappeared from radar during its planned trip from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing on March 8, 2014, leaving everyone scratching their heads. In the cockpit, Captain Zahari and First Officer Fariq were seasoned pros, making sure everyone was safe and sound. It was about 1:01 a.m. Malaysian time when the plane, cruising at 35,000 feet, sent out its usual half-hour update through the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. Everything seemed totally normal in the report, with no signs of anything being off. Then, around 1:07 a.m., the ACARS sent its last message, saying that all systems were good to go. The next update was supposed to come in at 1:37 a.m., but unfortunately, it never showed up. The most eerie moment happened around 1:19 a.m., when the plane was getting ready to cross into Vietnamese airspace. The cockpit chatted with the air traffic controller in Kuala Lumpur, saying, "Good night, Malaysia 370. This was just a standard thing to say, kind of like a routine check-in before switching to another control center. But this time, the expected response from the news center never came through. Recently, scientists have uncovered some pretty shocking new info and theories about the whole Flight 370 situation. These discoveries could totally change how we see what happened, giving us some serious insights into the mystery. Number 1. Cryptic calls and signals. In the fascinating story of MH370, after the plane disappeared from radar, it surprisingly kept sending signals to a satellite that was just hanging out in the Indian Ocean for a whole 6 hours. This satellite was owned by a company called Inmarsat, based in London. This strange communication suggests that the plane didn't just crash out of nowhere, it actually kept flying fast and high during that time. This was possible because some of the onboard communication systems, like the passenger gadgets, cockpit tools, and automated maintenance reports, had been turned off or disconnected on purpose. Talking to the Inmarsat satellite felt like trying to hear soft whispers. We got a total of 7 connections. 2 were kicked off automatically by the plane, and the other 5 came from the Inmarsat ground station. We also tried making 2 satellite phone calls, but sadly, no one picked up on the other side. Still, those calls gave us some extra information about what was going on. Most of these messages were tied to 2 numbers that HEMA, who I guess is either a person or a system, just started keeping track of. Number 2. Radar information. So it turns out that some radar info from air traffic control and some secret details from the Malaysian Air Force showed that after MH370 vanished from radar, it suddenly took a sharp turn to the southwest. Then it changed direction again, flying back over the Malay Peninsula and even circling around Penang Island. After that, the plane went northwest, crossed over the Malacca Strait, and eventually dropped off radar somewhere over the Andaman Sea. This part of the flight lasted over an hour, which makes it seem like this whole situation was a lot weirder than your typical hijacking or any kind of accident or pilot suicide we've seen before. The whole investigation into MH370 took authorities in some pretty surprising and unfamiliar directions right from the get-go. This mystery around MH370 has been a topic of investigation for ages, and people all over the globe have been speculating like crazy. Families everywhere were hit hard by the loss. It's hard to believe that a super advanced plane with all the latest tech and backup communication could just disappear like that. Deleting an email for good is tricky, and totally cutting yourself off from the modern world is almost impossible, even if someone really wanted to do it. You know, a Boeing 777 is built to stay connected all the time. So when it went missing, people started coming up with all sorts of crazy theories. Some of them are pretty out there, but they get a lot of buzz since it's really rare for commercial planes to just disappear these days. Despite prompt denials by Malaysian officials and efforts by the Malaysian Air Force to create confusion, the truth about the plane's peculiar flight path started emerging rapidly. Number 3. The astonishing journey towards Antarctica. Some tech whizzes in London did something pretty amazing using Doppler shift logs. They figured out exactly where a plane was. This cool breakthrough was all thanks to Inmarsat. At around 2:40 a.m., the plane, which everyone thought was flying straight, totally threw everyone for a loop by making a big turn south. This surprising move happened over Sumatra, which is the northernmost island in Indonesia. Even though there was a bit of uncertainty in their findings, experts think the plane kept heading towards Antarctica, which is way farther than anyone expected. 6 hours later, the Doppler data showed that the plane made a sudden and steep drop. It was surprisingly fast, up to 5 times quicker than what's normal. Just a minute or two after it crossed the 7th arc, the plane sadly went down into the ocean. This crazy fast drop might have caused the airplane to lose some parts before hitting the water. The evidence suggests this wasn't some planned water landing, but a total disaster. The plane seemed to break apart into a ton of pieces almost right away. But as of now, we still don't know exactly where it went down or what caused it. The satellite data just doesn't have enough solid proof to back it up, leaving this whole situation a mystery. Number 4. The Doppler value. The data analysis suggests that the plane probably turned south. This idea gets a solid boost from the second value recorded by Inmarsat, which we can call the Doppler value. This value is super important because it shows how the plane's frequency changes as it zips around in relation to the satellite. It's a common way for planes to chat with satellites during flights to keep everything running smoothly. The airplane systems are pretty good at picking up on changes in frequency and making adjustments. But sometimes those adjustments aren't spot on, because older satellites might not always send signals exactly how the planes expect. Plus, other things like the satellite's orbit, tilt, and temperature can mess with the signals too, which can leave some noticeable marks on the data. Number 5. The elusive black boxes hunt satellite info, showed something pretty wild. Apparently, the plane kept flying for hours after it went silent. Eventually, Malaysian officials came clean and said that report was spot on. But you know, Malaysia's government has a reputation for being a bit secretive and not super trustworthy during the whole missing plane investigation. That definitely raised some eyebrows, especially with all the corruption claims floating around about the government in that area. Things got pretty messy for the accident investigators from Europe, Australia, and the US. They ran into a lot of issues because some info was kept under wraps, and the initial search efforts in the South China Sea weren't the best. As a result, they didn't find any floating debris, which was a real bummer. If the Malaysians had been upfront from the beginning, finding some debris could have helped them figure out roughly where the plane went down, maybe even leading to recovering the black boxes. Looking for those black boxes took the search team to a really remote part of the ocean, which is pretty huge, by the way. Remember Air France Flight 447? Finding its black boxes took a whopping 2 years, even though they had a decent idea of where to start looking. They spent almost 2 months trying without any luck before deciding to dive deeper into the ocean. The search at the surface wrapped up in April 2014, and that was officially under Malaysia's watch. But honestly, they didn't have the best tools for searching the deep sea. Luckily, Australia, being a good global team player, jumped in to help. They led the way in the areas pinpointed by satellite data. The crazy depth and untouched nature of the region made it a tough challenge. Figuring out the underwater landscape was the first step. Only after that could they safely tow specialized sonar vehicles deep down under the ocean. Number 6. The intentional flight's secrets. So, here's something interesting. This whole event might not just be a random accident, it could actually be something that was planned out. The flight took this really weird route and didn't communicate with anyone, which doesn't really fit with the usual explanations like technical issues or human error. You know, the typical stuff like computer glitches, control system problems, or even environmental factors like ice, lightning, or bird strikes. And let's not forget those super rare things like meteorites or volcanic ash. All of these just don't seem to add up when you look at the flight's complicated path. You know, it's kind of wild how all the usual stuff, like problems with sensors or radio gear and issues with instruments or electrical systems, doesn't really explain why the flight went off course on purpose. Even when you think about things like fires, smoke, sudden cabin pressure drops, or explosions in the cargo hold, they still don't give you the whole picture of what happened. Plus, the fact that there haven't been any past cases of pilots getting confused, medical emergencies, or outside threats like bombs or attacks just makes this whole situation even more puzzling. Number 7. Sabotage in the clouds. A lot of folks thought that the plane's control was being handled from some remote spot down below near the front galley where they keep the electrical gear. But actually, it was all happening right from the cockpit. This went down between 1:01 a.m. when the plane hit 35,000 feet and 1:21 a.m. when it vanished from the secondary radar. During that 20-minute stretch, the plane's automatic condition reporting system sent its usual 30-minute update to the airline's maintenance team via satellite. This update had info about the fuel level, altitude, speed, where the plane was, and any weird stuff happening. The transmission showed that the airplane's satellite comms were working at that time. Since it's pretty rare for two pilots to act together like that, it seems likely that by the time the plane vanished from the secondary radar, one of the pilots was either out of it, had passed away, or got locked out of the cockpit. So, both military and civilian planes showed up on the main radar. When they looked into it more, they found out that the pilot of MH370 probably turned off the autopilot because the sharp turn to the southwest was way too precise for the automated systems to handle. Plus, it seems like whoever was flying the plane intentionally let the cabin pressure drop and switched off a big chunk, if not all, of the electrical systems around the same time. It's still a mystery why they did this, but it ended up messing with the satellite link for a bit. Number 8. Cruising to conspiracy. In Boulder, Colorado, Mike, who's an electrical engineer and part of an independent group, really got into studying the radar data about the airplane. He was convinced that during a turn, the plane shot up to 40,000 feet, which is pretty close to its max altitude. If that happened, the passengers would have felt some serious G-forces, pushing them back into their seats. Mike came up with a theory that this climb wasn't an accident. He thought it was on purpose to quickly depressurize the plane, which would have knocked everyone out and sadly led to their deaths. He thought that maybe the intentional depressurization was a way to keep everyone calm during the long flight. The effects of the depressurization would have gone unnoticed in the cabin if it weren't for those drop-down oxygen masks that popped out in emergencies. But here's the catch. Those masks only worked for about 15 minutes if you were below 13,000 feet. At the cruising altitude of 40,000 feet, though, the people in the cabin would have quickly passed out without even feeling like they were choking or gasping for air. The passengers who didn't make it would still be slumped in their seats, their faces resting against those oxygen masks that were no longer doing their job, just hanging from the ceiling. The whole scene would be pretty dim, lit only by the emergency lights. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, there were 4 pressurized oxygen masks ready to go, providing oxygen for a few hours. If someone decided to mess with the plane's pressure, they could have easily grabbed one of those masks and breathed just fine. As the plane zoomed in, it looked like just a tiny dot on the radar, speeding toward Penang Island at almost 600 miles per hour. Nearby was Butterworth Air Base, home to a bunch of Malaysian F-18 fighter jets and some air defense radar. But weirdly enough, it seemed like nobody was really paying attention to what was going on. As Mike kept digging into the situation, he couldn't shake off the odd feeling about how little notice the air defense radar and the jets were taking. The seriousness of what he was uncovering and the potential risks for aviation safety were really weighing on him. Number 9. When pilots take matters into their own hands. In the puzzling case of MH370's disappearance, there's a theory that the captain might have been involved. Could it be that he took control of the plane without using any force? It's definitely a creepy thought, but it's not totally out of the question since similar things have happened before. For example, back in 1997, the captain of a Silk Air flight from Singapore supposedly switched off some important recorders on a Boeing 737 before crashing it into a river at high speed. Back in 1999, the co-pilot of Egypt Air Flight 990 made a terrible choice and crashed the plane into the ocean near Long Island, taking everyone on board with him. Then, just a month before the whole MH370 mystery, the captain of Mozambique Airlines Flight 70 also crashed his plane from way up high, and sadly, nobody survived that one either. And let's not forget about the Germanwings tragedy, where the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, locked the pilot out of the cockpit and crashed the Airbus into the French Alps on March 24, 2015, killing everyone on board. It's just heartbreaking. So, it turns out that Lubitz had been feeling pretty down and had even looked up info about MH370's disappearance about a year before. But it's tough to believe he could have been involved in that whole situation. People described him as a young, upbeat guy who was really looking forward to his upcoming wedding. There's no evidence that he had any personal issues or was really struggling with depression. Plus, he wasn't some German pilot stuck at a low-cost airline with bad pay and no respect. Instead, he was flying a fancy Boeing 777 in a country where the national airline and its pilots were really well regarded. Number 10. Unmasking Captain Zahari. With all the buzz going around, people are starting to look closely at Captain Zahari. He's usually painted as this top-notch pilot and a chill family guy who loved messing around with flight simulators. His family definitely backs this image up, but there are some pretty obvious signs that things weren't all good. Cops found some stuff about Zahari's life that really needed a deeper look, but in the end, what they found didn't really add up to much. Zahari's ability to handle work stress was assessed, and he got a thumbs up, with no signs of indifference, anxiety, or nervousness in the past. His usual social interactions and family issues didn't show any major changes either. There were no signs that he was pulling away from friends, changing his routines, or losing interest in things. When we looked at his behavior on the day of the flight, plus the 3 flights before that, the airport CCTV showed Zahari looking calm, well-groomed, and dressed to impress. His usual traits, like his posture, facial expressions, and gestures, were all pretty much the same. It seems like the official report doesn't really match up with what we know about Zahari, especially considering the troubling signs that were ignored. He was living a pretty lonely life. After his wife left, he found himself isolated, spending long hours just waiting for flights to come and go. He had a crush on a married woman with kids, and he also got fixated on a couple of young models he saw online. He tried reaching out to them, but they never responded, and some of the things he said were a bit over the line. Zahari's life took a big turn, pulling him away from the steady and secure life he used to have. He got really into social media, which might have made him feel even more isolated, and some experts think he could be dealing with clinical depression. One interesting thing came up when they looked at his flight simulator. The FBI found a flight path that looked a lot like MH370's. Oddly enough, the Malaysian investigators didn't think it was a big deal, even though it could mean something important. When you dig into these details, it paints a clearer picture of what Captain Zahari was going through, showing that his struggles were a lot deeper than what people saw on the surface. Number 11. The most controversial theory. So, there's this interesting twist in the whole Flight 370 mystery that shakes up the idea that the plane just crashed and vanished in the Indian Ocean. Some folks are suggesting that maybe the plane didn't sink at all. This theory comes from several relatives of the passengers who say they heard their loved ones' phones ringing for up to 4 days after the crash was supposed to happen. It's pretty wild that 19 families have gone through similar experiences, shining a light on this fascinating phenomenon. One really touching moment that stood out was when a family member showed on Chinese TV that he could still call his deceased brother's phone, and it actually rang. That emotional moment really gave some weight to the whole ringtone theory. A telecom expert named Paul Franks is backing this theory and really believes that if the plane actually went down in the ocean, the phones wouldn't keep ringing for so long. He shared his thoughts on Reddit, pointing out that when a phone goes underwater, especially in seawater, it's pretty much toast. Even if it somehow stayed alive, it wouldn't pick up any signals from deep in the ocean, which makes the idea of the plane crashing seem even more questionable. Could those ringing sounds that families heard really be signals from the missing plane? If the plane didn't go down in the ocean, where could it be hanging out now? What else could explain why people are hearing those phone rings? With all this interesting stuff, it makes you think if we should rethink what we originally thought about what happened to the plane. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you just saw on screen. Number 12. The Trail of Breadcrumbs. Victor Ianello is a creative entrepreneur from Roanoke, Virginia, and he's really made a name for himself in an independent group. He's been diving deep into simulated flights, especially looking into what happened with Malaysian Airlines MH370, a case that seems to have slipped under the radar of Malaysian investigators. What's really caught Ianello's eye is how the pilot, Zahari, handled the flight simulation. Instead of flying it, like a regular continuous flight, Zahari decided to move it along in stages, tweaking the fuel and making jumps until the plane just vanished from the simulation. Ianello thinks it's pretty strange that Zahari seems to play a big part in everything that's happened. He's also pointed out that Zahari didn't really need any fancy tech to use a basic Microsoft game simulator for what he did. That's made Ianello suspicious, and now he's come up with a pretty interesting theory. He wonders if Zahari's flight simulator experience was his quirky way of saying goodbye, almost like leaving breadcrumbs behind. Even though we don't know exactly why Zahari did what he did, Ianello believes it would be a mistake to just brush off the simulator flight as a coincidence. Ianello thinks that this unusual flight simulator session is really important for figuring out the complicated stories behind MH370's mysterious disappearance. Basically, it gives us a peek into Zahari's possible mindset and what role he might have played in the events that led to this strange incident. Number 13. The Cyber Conspiracy. Esteemed historian Norman Davis puts forth another closely related idea on this matter. He suggests that the flight could have been hacked remotely and redirected to a hidden location. According to Davis, cyber experts might have exploited technology meant to prevent a recurrence of the September 11th terror attacks. This technology enabled planes to be controlled from the ground. The specific technology he mentions is the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot, as detailed in his book Beneath Another Sky, A Global Journey into History. The existence of this technology opens up the possibility of a chilling scenario. Davis believes the plane could have been carrying sensitive materials or personnel headed for Beijing, making it a target for not just one, but two kidnapping attempts. Since conclusive answers have yet to be provided, Davis deems it reasonable to engage in speculation on the matter. According to Davis, the sequence of events might have involved the plane initially being remotely kidnapped by a hacker who intended to divert it to the U.S. naval base in Diego Garcia, located in the Indian Ocean. Subsequently, another hacker or remote controller may have taken over the plane to prevent it from reaching its intended destination. Number 14. The elusive MH370 jungle crash site. In September 2019, during the ongoing search for the missing MH370 airplane, a British video producer named Ian Wilson came up with an intriguing idea. He suspected that the plane might have crashed in a remote jungle, making it hard to spot with satellite imagery. Wilson decided to focus his search on rainforests in Southeast Asia. While exploring satellite images, he noticed something that looked like an airplane hidden deep within the Cambodian jungle, around 60 miles west of Phnom Penh. The images showed what seemed to be a plane lodged at an angle against a mountainside. Despite the fact that some debris from MH370 had been found in the Indian Ocean, only a small number of parts were confirmed to be from the missing plane. This left room for speculation, with some still questioning the theory that the aircraft crashed into the ocean. Undeterred by the challenges, Ian and his brother Jackie decided to journey into the jungle to investigate their discovery firsthand. However, the trek was not easy, and due to the dangerous terrain, their guides had to turn back. Despite this obstacle, the brothers remained convinced that they had found something significant. Aviation expert Lieutenant Tim McMillan noted that while the object in the images did resemble an airplane, it seemed too small to be a Boeing 777, which was the model of the missing MH370. Eventually, experts confirmed that the wreckage did not belong to MH370, but was from a different plane entirely. Even with this disappointment, Ian and Jackie are still confident in their find and hope to return to the site once they have enough funds to continue their exploration. G. Selina Waterloo, a French relative of one of the passengers, claimed that the US Air Force shot down MH370 to confiscate electronic equipment destined for China, and a global cover-up was staged to conceal the truth. However, these theories face numerous challenges and criticisms. Solid evidence and clear motives for a shoot-down are lacking, making it hard to substantiate these claims. No concrete proof of any missile or fighter jet near MH370 or any state actor's intention to shoot it down has emerged. The alleged satellite images and anonymous threats have not been validated by official sources. Furthermore, orchestrating the shooting of a civilian plane and then concealing it would require significant coordination and authorization, entailing severe legal consequences. Maintaining such a massive conspiracy without any leaks or whistleblowers is highly implausible. Consequently, the veracity of these theories remains uncertain. Which theory about Malaysia Flight MH370's disappearance do you find most plausible? What do you think might have happened to that flight? Do tell us in the